The art of lightsaber combat is one of the most integral skills that a Jedi can learn at their time in the Academy, and later serves as one of the premier characteristics that a mature Jedi Knight carries with them into the field. From a young age, each Knight is able to hone their own specific style in combat, narrowing down their tastes and preferences in training until they formally adopt one of the 7 forms of lightsaber combat. Each Jedi has a motivation and a mindset behind carefully choosing their preferred form, and for many Jedi, their choice of form is an insight into the Jedi as an individual, their goals, and how they conduct themselves through the Force. For Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, the art of Form 3 was particularly appealing, and Obi-Wan would go on to not only be considered a master of Soresu, but the preeminent expert of the form and one of the most gifted practitioners of Form 3 that the Jedi Order had ever produced. But why exactly was Kenobi so fond of Form 3? Why did he begin practicing Soresu? And more importantly, how did his personality and his choice of lightsaber form influence one another? Well, stick with us today, students of the Force, and let's take a deep dive into Obi-Wan's connection with his chosen lightsaber form, which is especially prominent now after episode 4 of Obi-Wan Kenobi, as Obi-Wan is beginning to reconnect with the Force and his skill with the blade. Contrary to popular belief, Obi-Wan wasn't actually an early adopter of Soresu, and didn't actually take up the form until after he was already graduated into knighthood. Originally, Kenobi specialized in Form 4, otherwise known as Ataru, which he learned from his own master Qui-Gon Jinn, who utilized and specialized in the same form. During Obi-Wan's course of his apprenticeship with Qui-Gon, he was taught the same lightsaber style that Jinn had mastered over the years, and the two practiced Ataru together alongside one another for their time as master and apprentice. Qui-Gon was an avid user of Ataru for decades before his death, and he was a particular fan of keeping pressure on an opponent, doing so until they could be overpowered and ultimately defeated. This is what allowed him to keep up with Darth Maul on the defense for the duration of their encounter, and the dual use of Ataru from both Jedi during the encounter allowed both Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan to mount strong offenses against the Sith Lord. Upon Qui-Gon Jinn's death, however, Obi-Wan started to see the flaws in Ataru, and specifically the lack of defensive capabilities that cost his master his life. It was the death of Qui-Gon Jinn that would go on to define Obi-Wan as a lightsaber duelist and a Jedi entirely. Qui-Gon Jinn's age, in tandem with Maul's stamina, ultimately led to Qui-Gon growing tired and slow, which meant that his defenses were doomed to ultimately fail against the onslaught of the Sith. Greatly saddened and defined by his master's death, Obi-Wan began investigating the form with the best defensive capabilities that would ultimately keep him and the ones that he loved protective most effectively, and his studies led him to exploring Form 3, Soresu. Soresu, more formally known as Form 3, was the primary defensive form and was specifically designed to not only incorporate a strong defense, but focus specifically on perfecting the art of defense. The focus originally stemmed from blaster defense training, using tight blade work to defend a Jedi from rapid blaster fire and allow them to deflect multiple incoming attacks simultaneously. Eventually, however, Soresu became much more than simply a lightsaber form, but became a prominent symbol of Jedi pacifism, something that Obi-Wan embodied. A Jedi who opted to use Soresu oftentimes only resorted to combat when they had no other option, and the most prominent practitioners of the form often led with diplomacy as the primary tool for de-escalation in any conflict, leading with their minds, not with their sabers. This fit incredibly well with Obi-Wan's own philosophies about combat, as over the course of the Clone Wars, he became known as the Negotiator. He gained this title because he always sought to resolve his conflicts peacefully, electing to use peace talks whenever possible in order to avoid combat at all costs. Many Jedi would go on to criticize Soresu for its lack of offensive capabilities, citing that it was based more on ensuring a Jedi's survival than helping a Jedi achieve victory. If a Jedi chose to use Soresu, they often did not seek to win an encounter and defeat their enemy, opting only to survive and living to fight another day. Despite the criticisms, however, this helped Obi-Wan long into his elder years, as Soresu was incredibly adept at mitigating how much energy a user needed to expend in order to be a proficient fighter, allowing him to stockpile his force potential until the crucial moment. In contrast to Soresu, Qui-Gon Jinn grew weary towards the end of his final duel due to his strong offensive capabilities and strong offensive output. Soresu allowed individuals to continue fighting for prolonged periods of time without spending all of their energy on a strong offense. Even into his old age, this made old Ben Kenobi a fierce combatant simply because he had far more stamina than a Jedi Knight of his age and condition reasonably would possess. Not to mention, being a master of Soresu made him the perfect foil to many notable notable Clone Wars combatants, including the likes of Darth Maul and General Grievous. So long as a Soresu practitioner was able to maintain a calm center, they could outlast most opponents until an aggressive combatant wore themselves down, got frustrated, or succumbed to combat fatigue, which is exactly what happened in Obi-Wan's duel with Anakin. Anakin became frustrated as well as fatigued, while Obi-Wan simply outlasted him and waited for the perfect opening. From here, the basic processes of a lightsaber duel remained fairly standard for Soresu users. Step 1 was to prolong the fight as long as possible, surviving and allowing one's enemy to be the primary aggressor in the situation. Step 2 took place after stalling the fight and dragging it out, at which point an experienced Soresu user could start to look for small breaks in their opponent's defenses. As an opponent got angrier and more frustrated with the duel, or likewise got more fatigued, then their own defenses began to slip. From here, Soresu masters only needed one well-placed offensive strike to maim, incapacitate, or even kill their opponent. And this is a very common practice that Obi-Wan used quite regularly. In the Clone Wars, he was able to use his mastery of his form to fend off the onslaught of both Maul and Savage Opress simultaneously. When he used Ataru, he and Maul were not only evenly matched, but Maul actually gained the upper hand at the end of their duel, and was only defeated due to his own hubris and arrogance. After adopting Soresu, however, Obi-Wan was able to survive a duel between both Zabrak warriors at once, despite both of them being incredibly formidable warriors in their own right. It's also interesting to note that Obi-Wan's history with Ataru grants him some offensive capabilities that most single-form Jedi don't always have. He trained in Form 4 Ataru until he was 25 years old, being taught an incredibly gifted Jedi combatant in Master Jin who knew the form exceedingly well. Ataru helped Obi-Wan to not only defeat Maul, but carried him through his apprenticeship, which goes to show that Obi-Wan was more than adequately experienced with Form 4. This also meant that when necessary, Obi-Wan had his own set of offensive maneuvers that he learned under his time under Jin, but he largely relegated them to brief strikes meant to exploit periodic openings, and did not fully at all rely on Ataru. This allowed Kenobi to prioritize negotiation and peace talks before resorting to combat, and allowing him to hone his negotiation skills alongside his prowess in defensive lightsaber combat. His specific choice of form allowed him to go toe-to-toe with a newly awakened Darth Vader on Mustafar, and not only survive, but wear the Dark Lord down to the point of being corrupted by his frustration. Once he prolonged the fight to a certain extent, Vader became frustrated and weary, seeking to end the fight and dropping his own defenses in the process. This allowed Kenobi to follow the process detailed earlier, exploit small openings after wearing down the defenses of an opponent, and in this case, Anakin's defenses were eroded by his own arrogance. But anyway, students of the Force, what do you think of Kenobi's relationship with Form 3 Soresu, and do you think it was the right choice for him? And what do you think of his previous experiences with Form 4 Ataru as taught to him by his own master Qui-Gon Jinn? As always, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, we will have another video releasing in the next few days detailing all 7 lightsaber forms in great detail, so be sure to check that out. Until then, students of the Force, may the Force be with you and have a great day.